بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا المرسلين. Again, following on from last week, we touched upon when the Prophet ﷺ, he moved from the care of his grandfather passed away, then he moved into the care of his uncle. Then his uncle, he took him with him to Syria, and then before that they done the dua at the time of the drought, and then after that the Prophet ﷺ, he then participated in the Harbul Fujjar, in the war which was the unholy war which the Prophet ﷺ participated in. Then the Hilful Fudul, which was the treaty which took place after this in order to protect the weaker people in that society. So this is another incident which took place at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So all of these just titles should bring back all of the incidents which happened. And then finally we moved on to what the Prophet ﷺ, he was doing. So he was trading, he learned to trade, he went to Syria many times, came back, he learned to trade. Then the Prophet ﷺ, after learning to trade, he also grazed goats for a short period of time, and after grazing goats, finally, the last thing we looked at was the fact that the Prophet ﷺ, he got married to Khadija radiallahu ta'ala, and this was the last thing which we really looked at last week. Then moving on, again, like we mentioned, the amount of narrations we get before the Prophet ﷺ became a prophet are quite few and far between. So all the way from 25 till 35, there's nothing major which we find from the books of Seerah which tell us much about the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And also the books we're going through, we're trying to keep it not too detailed, we're trying to keep it quite brief. So as we mentioned, the book we're generally focusing on is about 500-600 pages, whereas you get other books which have 500-600 chapters, or 30-40 volumes. You have books this size on the Seerah, but generally our aim is to firstly get an overview, a good overview of the life of the Prophet ﷺ. So the next incident which you look at is the reconstruction of the Kaaba, where the Prophet ﷺ, again, he was involved. And also because it's the house of Allah, generally the history of this is quite interesting as well. So from the beginning of time, the Kaaba, generally we have 5, if you look carefully, 6 main reconstructions of the Kaaba happened. However, primarily before the Prophet ﷺ became a prophet, there was 3 main ones we should look at. So the first time when the Prophet ﷺ mentions in a hadith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he commanded Adam alayhi salam to build the house, and he sent Jibreel alayhi salam to tell him where to build it. So when Adam alayhi salam first came to earth, the house, the Kaaba, was built for Allah. Then this house said that when the great flood happened, then this house was destroyed. So the original Kaaba was no more. Then a few years later, Ibrahim alayhi salam, he came and he rebuilt the same Kaaba in the same place. However, because of the flood, it's been completely you couldn't see anything, couldn't see the foundation. So Jibreel alayhi salam came and told him where to put the foundations, and then obviously he built it with Ismail alayhi salam. And this is well documented, and again at the time of Hajj, Eid al-Adha, we always talk about the sacrifices of Ibrahim alayhi salam, and the fact that the center of Islam, the Kaaba, was built by Ibrahim alayhi salam. That was the second rebuilding. And then this rebuilding, generally, according to the books of Seerah, this stayed intact to an extent all the way until the life of the Prophet ﷺ. So when the Prophet ﷺ was 35, the Quraysh, obviously as we know, the area of the Kaaba is something which is prone to flooding, especially those who are elder. They will know when they've been in the 1970s, 1980s, great floods happen. We may even have seen our own images where people swimming around the mataf. So much flooding would happen in Mecca. Every 10 years there was a big flood like this, which would cause the whole thing just to be drowned. So all of this caused damage to the Kaaba, and you would continuously be damaged by these kind of things. Another thing we notice is that close by to the Kaaba, people would also live. It's not like today where you have a very big distance between the Haram and the first hotel. The people would live close by. So specifically at the time when the Prophet ﷺ turned 35, there was a fire which broke out. Somebody was cooking food quite close, and then this fire spread and most of the Kaaba burned down. So obviously, although it didn't look great, but because it was a very holy place, people were a little bit scared to rebuild it, to knock it down and to do it again. So it was always something which they didn't put high on their priority. They put it up to Allah to protect the house. Might as well turn it off if you don't mind. Just a second. So we have technical issues. Really not quite advanced enough. Jazakumullah khair. So again, as we were saying, the Kaaba was rebuilt once by Ibrahim alayhi salam, and then now when the Prophet ﷺ turned 35, the Quraysh came together and they decided there's so much damage, it needs to be rebuilt, it needs to be put together. This is a very famous story of the Hajar Aswad. But also just beforehand, we also know about the lifestyle of the Quraysh, because when the Prophet ﷺ starts giving da'wah to them, we know what kind of people they are. So the first thing which they agreed, they finally managed to agree that they will build the house. The first thing they agreed was that they will build the house only from halal wealth. This is one very important thing. One of the elders, they made this decision that only halal wealth will be used. So if any wealth has been from interest, any wealth from illicit, like prostitution kind of thing, that was not allowed. From any kind of, from interest, from selling alcohol, from gambling, a lot of them would make lots of money like this. As we know, they used to do a lot of gambling. So they said that if any of these means were used, we're not going to carry on like this, we're going to stop. So they said that we're not going to use any of this haram wealth. So again, this is the same principle even today. When we build a masjid, we build an Islamic event, we take donations for Islamic things. Again, we don't use wealth which has been, if somebody won the lottery and wants to build a new mosque, we don't accept that as a mosque. There's no point in building that. Somebody's, all his income is from alcohol and he wants to donate. This is generally not accepted in our societies, because even when they're building the Kaaba, they understood it's a holy house of Allah. It's something that has to be pure. Everything about it has to be pure, because we rely on the blessings of Allah. We're always relying on we're not the success of a mosque is not based on whether or not we have the right resources. We might have the best imam, we might have the best committee member, we might have the best people that come to the masjid, but to actually have a mosque successful, you have to have Allah's help, you have to have blessing. To have something going on well, this has to have, so purity is very important, to have purity in the world. So this is something which they understood there as well. And then they started work on the foundation and started making firm foundations in the Kaaba, making it a little bit bigger. At that time, Ibrahim alayhi salam's building, it was just a little bit taller than the average man. Nowadays it's a lot bigger, but it was just a little bit taller than the average man, maybe 1 or 2 feet higher. So it wasn't that tall, it wasn't that big either. Obviously because of their lack of funds, they couldn't make the whole thing either. So obviously when they said pure wealth, then a lot of people's wealth couldn't be used now. So they had to there was limited amount of wealth. However, one help from Allah came, which is what the Romans, in Yemen, they were building a church. So from Rome, for those of us that know geography, Rome is at the bottom of Europe. To go from there to Yemen, which is the bottom of Saudi Arabia, so obviously they went by sea. So they were taking a ship full of top quality building materials, and also a good carpenter to help build the church in Yemen. Now what happened is, the qadr of Allah was that this ship, it was wrecked and it ended up in Jeddah, which is known as Judah at that time. So this ship, it was wrecked on the way, and they couldn't go anywhere. So it didn't drown, but they couldn't carry on their journey. That's how damaged it was. So they had to stop somewhere. So they stopped in Jeddah, and the port in Jeddah, they came there, and they couldn't carry on their journey. They couldn't take the ship back. The ship was ruined. So they all survived, but they had to now get rid of all of this building material. So the Makkans were building the Kaaba, this quality material. They went and Walid ibn Mughira, he went and he negotiated this. He said, I'm going to buy this. And also the carpenter, even the name is given in the Seerah books, he was taken from the Romans and he came and helped build this Kaaba. So they managed to find out about this, and they brought all of these goods to help build the Kaaba. Like we mentioned, there's a big problem in demolishing the Kaaba. They don't want to demolish it. So then, now the time has come, they've done the foundations, the time's come, you've got to destroy the original building and put the new building on the new foundations. So nobody wanted to do this. Walid bin Mughira, again, he took the lead. So he started demolishing a bit of it. And it was almost a litmus test. So everyone else, nobody helped him. Everybody just stayed behind. They were just waiting. Because obviously they had a very firm belief, believe it or not. Even though they were mushriks, they done shirk. But They had a very firm belief in divinity. One of the things which caused divine belief, if you remember from the field incident, so they believe the house is sacred, Allah will protect the house, it's a very important house to Allah. So then they had this belief in Allah, Allah will protect the house. So now if somebody starts demolishing it, they were scared, maybe this will be ruined. So they let Walid start, and then he destroyed a part of the Kaaba, and then he went to sleep that night, and they checked, anything happens to him, does anything go wrong with Walid? So they all waited, they spent the whole night, and the next morning he wakes up, he's fine. So the next morning everybody joins in demolishing the Kaaba. So the Kaaba is now demolished and they're ready to build a new one. The Seerah books also mention that they were they almost spoke to Allah, and they said, they expressed their intentions, it's not to ruin the house, we're going to reconstruct the house. So when they done this, then after this they were reconstructing the house now. Now obviously again they had a lot of respect for the house. So they divided the construction of the house into all the tribes of the Quraysh. So everybody had a part to do. This is very nicely done. Everybody they didn't have a fight about this, amazingly, but they just managed to divide it, that we will do this part, we will do this wall, we will do this side. Everybody was agreed. And all the tribes, Banu Hashim had one tribe, Banu Makhzum had another tribe. All the tribes had a specific place they had to do. So they're all building the house and they all built their place, and alhamdulillah everything went well. And then eventually what we find is that the main story which we find the Prophet ﷺ's involvement in is when it comes to putting the black stone into the Kaaba. So then obviously the black stone is on the corner. So we have one tribe working on this side, another tribe working here. So when the time came to put it in, these two tribes got very angry with each other that I'm going to do it, and the other one said no, I'm going to do it. So then eventually everybody found out, and they all said we are going to do it, we ourselves are going to take this great responsibility. And very similar to what we find, obviously this was Jahiliyyah, this was the time of ignorance. Unfortunately sometimes we find the same thing in our communities. Sometimes people, they want to do good work for the mosque, but sometimes they're so passionate about it that some of the culture gets involved and they do anti-Islamic things for the Islamic thing. So again the same thing happened here, that they were so passionate about being pious and being God-fearing that they ended up getting their swords out and saying we're going to fight for this, so this kind of thing. Eventually the elders, one of the elders, he managed to calm everybody down and said that the way we'll decide this is that tomorrow morning whoever comes in first into the vicinity of the Kaaba, he will decide, he will resolve the dispute. What this meant really is that whoever comes in first, whichever tribe he's from, that tribe will put the stone. This is what it meant. So imagine you're in Kaaba, and imagine we said that whoever comes first tomorrow for Fajr, he will decide what we're going to do with the £1,000, for example. And obviously most likely, especially in Jahiliyyah, he will take it for himself. So whoever's going to come first into the Kaaba after this dispute, he will take the stone and put it himself, or his tribe, he'll give it to his tribe leader. This was the general understanding. It wasn't going to solve the problem. One of the problems that happened is Banu Makhzum especially, and many of the tribes, they had taken an oath that we are going to fight to the death. If we don't put the Hajar Aswad there, we're going to fight, we're going to shed blood on this, we're happy to fight on this. They'd taken this oath. So now if the Prophet ﷺ came and Banu Hashim, if his and Banu Abdul Muttalib, his clan, put it in, they would have still had this fight. So now the Prophet ﷺ comes. If it was anybody else from any other tribe, he would have given it to his tribe leader to put it in. Prophet ﷺ doesn't do that. This is what we see, and this is why it's not just coincidence that he came first and he solved the problem. The actual thinking behind getting everyone to do it was a strange thing. Nobody expected this. Every tribe expected whoever comes, it was a luck of the draw, it was basically a lottery. Whoever comes in first, that tribe will do it. But the Prophet this is an important point to understand, that the Prophet ﷺ is actually his ingenious thinking here to save the fighting. Anyway, so what obviously he done, the story is quite famous. Prophet ﷺ was the first person to walk in. The first thing we realize is the reaction of the Quraysh. Nobody was disappointed, everybody was so happy. They said Al-Amin has come. Remember, he had already developed himself in that society to be trustworthy, to be a trader who would give back, who would never cheat anybody, he would never lie, he would always be honest. So they were all happy that Muhammad has come, that Al-Amin has come. And they were very happy about this. And then they said, he will judge very fairly between us. So then the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't give it to his tribe. He took the stone and he called a cloth and put the stone inside the cloth. And then he told all of the tribes to have one representative who will hold the cloth. So everybody then took the stone from, they had taken it to a safe place, from the safe place to close to the place where it has to be put into the corner. And then when he got there, the Prophet, obviously one person has to take it out, and the Prophet ﷺ himself actually placed it inside the area. But everybody was happy. Remember, Banu Makhzum were happy they had sworn an oath that we are going to fight now. But because they had had a part in taking the stone, then they didn't have to fulfill the oath because they had managed to take the stone. Banu Makhzum participated in taking the stone to the place it has to be put. So this is the way that this conflict was resolved. So this is the summary of the main story, that this is the reconstruction happened, and the Prophet ﷺ, he arbitrated and he got this problem solved. So that's the first story. The second thing for today is the story of Zayd bin Haritha, and this in the book we're going through, which is a short book, like I mentioned, just 500-600 pages long. In there, this incident isn't mentioned, but most Seerah books will mention this. Is a very interesting incident. Again, it proves just the nature and the humanity of the Prophet ﷺ. Zayd bin Haritha, very, very influential person. We'll know how important he was to Islam. The one thing just to say is, if people said if he hadn't passed away in the Battle of Mu'tah, he would have become the Khalifa instead of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, because he was so close to the Prophet ﷺ. Those of us that have watched The Message, I know it's a very famous Islamic film, many of us have watched it. So there, Zayd bin Haritha has a very high, he does all the announcements, he does all the calling, because obviously they don't show the Khalifas, they don't show the Prophet ﷺ, so he does all of the announcements. And obviously his status is rightly given. Obviously it's not good to maybe replicate this kind of thing, but basically for those of us that have that in our mind, some of us, we watch these kind of things and we remember Seerah because of this. But Zayd bin Haritha had a very, very high status. So now, how did he begin? He was a child, and his mother and father were from opposite tribes which hated each other. So when he was 8 years old, his mother took him home. Now, what happened is, his mother's tribe had a fight with father's tribe. Now, the child in that time, even nowadays, Islamically belongs to the father. Yeah, so now, despite the fact that the mother has his son at home, they kidnap this son in order to get revenge at the father. So Zayd bin Haritha, his mother and father are in opposite tribes, and then the tribe of his mother kidnapped the son of his mother because they didn't like the father, who was in the opposite tribe. So this is what they done, and kidnapped him and sold him into slavery. And then eventually he was bought by Khadija radiallahu anha. So Khadija radiallahu anha was looking for somebody to buy. She bought him, and then this was given as a gift to the Prophet ﷺ at his marriage. So the Prophet ﷺ received Zayd bin Haritha at the marriage, as a marriage gift. So Zayd bin obviously now his father has lost his son, so his father's still looking for his son, wondering where he's gone, trying to find out. Originally they were from Syria, in Banu Kalb in Syria. This is where they were living. So Khadija radiallahu anha gave him to the Prophet ﷺ as a gift. Now, despite being a slave, he was treated by the Prophet ﷺ with so much respect and honor and dignity that he almost became treated as a family member of the Prophet ﷺ. This is how much respect he was given. Now remember that the Prophet ﷺ, he was looking after him very well, but the family of Zayd, his father and his uncles and all of his family were still looking for him. So whenever they went anywhere, they were asking, have you seen my son, anybody that looks like him, he looks like this. And obviously this took many years, and he grew up, because obviously he got married at 25 and he was brought about 24. At 35, 36, 37, this is when this incident happens. So he grows up into a young man of 20, maybe something like that. So then finally the father gets news. One of the caravans from Syria goes to Mecca, comes back, and he says that we've seen your son, we found your son. So he gets very happy. He gets all of his money together, that we're going to go and buy our son back. And he gets all of his money, he takes his uncle with him, and they go to negotiate with the Prophet ﷺ to get this son of theirs back. So they come to Makkah, they find the Prophet ﷺ, and obviously they come, they praise the Prophet ﷺ, they say that mashallah, you're from the Quraysh, you're very respected, you're the grandson of Abdul Muttalib. Abdul Muttalib, remember, very, very famous, the big leader of the Quraysh. And he said, you are this and this, and then he praised him a lot, and he said, whatever you want, we will give it to you to get our son back. Obviously they weren't very rich, but they said, whatever, be generous with us, but we will buy this slave off you. And the Prophet ﷺ, obviously, morally, he knew they were telling the truth, because obviously this is their son. So he believed them, and he said that, because it's your son, I will give for free. But essentially, I will just do whatever Zayd wants. Whatever Zayd, if Zayd wants to go with you, I'll let him go with you, no problem. He can, if he wants to stay here, he can stay here. So he didn't demand any money. He said, morally, obviously, this is the right thing to do. So he said, okay, if Zayd wants to go with you, he'll go with you. Now the father is overjoyed. The father's got all his life savings together to come and get the son back. So he's getting it for free. So he's very, very happy. He said, the Prophet ﷺ asked him that, obviously they come to negotiate. So he said, we'll give you this much money. Prophet ﷺ says, how about we take this approach? If Zayd wants to go with you, he'll go with you. If he wants to stay here, he stays here. So they said, okay, they were very happy with this, because obviously they're thinking that he's living as a slave. So then, obviously, then the Zayd radiallahu anh was brought, and he was asked that, the father asked him that, alhamdulillah, we found you, and we know your father, this is your uncle, and you want to come back with us, inshallah, and you can go back to go back and live with your family. And Zayd, he said, the words he used was that I can never give anybody preference over the Prophet ﷺ. Obviously, because of everything he'd seen from the character of the Prophet ﷺ. So even at home, we find sometimes certain people at home, they're very different, in the community they're different, and at work they're very different. They're not nice in certain places when they don't need to be. However, we find with the Prophet ﷺ that in all, even at home, treating slaves, who he doesn't have to treat, well, nobody's going to ask him if he doesn't. Even when Zayd's father comes, again, he can't really force any, there's no judge there, this is jahiliyyah. There's not really anything that he can do if he says no. But anyway, the Prophet ﷺ agrees, and we see how much Zayd, he says that I would not prefer anyone to you, the Prophet ﷺ. So he said that I will stay. Obviously the father was a little bit upset about this, that how come, he's not coming back. But also he was very happy. I mean, you've got to think of it both ways. Originally he's thinking that he's been living as a slave. But now he's realizing he's got such a good life that he's happy to stay here instead of coming home. So he was happy as well. To further his happiness, the Prophet ﷺ went into the Kaaba and he announced that he's setting Zayd free. And he also announced that he's going to adopt Zayd as his son. These are the two things the Prophet ﷺ announced. So the Prophet ﷺ, he made this announcement, and from then on, Zayd was known as Muhammad bin Zayd. As Zayd bin Muhammad, Zayd the son of Muhammad ﷺ. And obviously this made the parents very happy. So he's not a slave anymore, he's now the son, he's a Qurayshi, he's going to inherit from the Prophet ﷺ, he's going to have respect in the society. And as we see, when he became a Muslim, he's very, very respected in the society. So he was adopted, and as we see, Zayd bin, sometimes we forget about him because he passed away in one of the battles. He didn't live until the death, but he's such an amazing Sahabi. The things, whenever he was sent on an expedition, he was always the commander, the commanding officer. If he was ever in an army, he was always in charge. Nobody was made Amir on Zayd radiallahu anh, whenever he was in an army. When Zayd many things we know about Zayd radiallahu anh, and that he was going to be he would have been the Khalifa. Many Sahaba say if he was still alive, he would have been the Khalifa. And many people say he was actually the first Muslim, because Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri says he was the first Muslim, because obviously when he was living with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Zayd eventually got married to Zainab bin Jahsh, who was also the wife of the Prophet ﷺ. Afterwards, the marriage didn't work out and they had a divorce. But they had a son called Osama bin Zayd. And this Osama bin Zayd was the Osama bin Zayd who, when the Prophet ﷺ was passing away, if you remember, there was an army going out of Medina at that time. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anh continued to send. Osama was very, very young at that time. And nobody could understand why is he made in charge of this army. So despite being young, he was in charge of the army. And then Umar radiallahu anh said to Abu Bakr that how can you send this such a young Sahabi as in charge? And then he said, how can I change the decision of Rasulullah? This is the son of Zayd bin Harith radiallahu anh. So we see very, very, and even his son went on to achieve great things as well. So this is the second story. The first story is the reconstruction of the Kaaba, and secondly, this Zayd bin Haritha story, where we see again the character of the Prophet ﷺ comes to life. And just before we finish this section, we'll just recap that the Prophet ﷺ was married to Khadija radiallahu anh, and he had many children as well. So it's important that we understand. We looked at his uncles previously, some of his uncles, and obviously Zayd bin Haritha is his adopted son. And obviously eventually the Prophet, this is not allowed in Islam, so that's why the Prophet ﷺ eventually, that's why we today, we know him as Zayd bin Haritha. We don't call him Zayd bin Muhammad, because his actual Islam made sure that his lineage goes back to Haritha. So this is what we learn about adoption. And eventually the Prophet ﷺ married, obviously he got so much respect the Prophet ﷺ gave to Zayd bin Haritha. He didn't have to do this, but he got him married to his cousin, who was Zainab bin Jahsh. and eventually the Prophet ﷺ, after the divorce, the Prophet ﷺ got married to her himself afterwards. Anyway, so looking at the children of the Prophet ﷺ, obviously this is the immediate family of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is very important information that we should try and remember this. The Prophet ﷺ, all of his children were from Khadija radiallahu anh, except one of them, and she comes later. But Khadija radiallahu anh was the mother of all of the children, and 2 sons and 4 daughters. The sons were Qasim and Abdullah, and the daughters were Ruqayya, Zainab, Kulthum and Fatima radiallahu anhum. So we see we should try and learn their names and remember who they were. This order 1 to 6, it goes in the order of their birth. So who was born first and who was born last. So Qasim, the son, was born first. Again, as we know, all of the sons of the Prophet ﷺ, the 2 and the 3rd one who was born later, they passed away very, very young. So Qasim radiallahu anhu, he passed away before his 2nd birthday. Then the 2nd child was Zainab radiallahu anha, and obviously she was the oldest daughter of the Prophet ﷺ. She was married and she ended up having 2 children. One was called Ali, who passed away quite young, and Umama radiallahu anh, who lived a long time. Umama, she got married to Ali radiallahu anh, so obviously Ali and Fatima were married originally, but Umama, after Fatima radiallahu anh passed away, Umama, again the granddaughter of the Prophet ﷺ, got married to Ali radiallahu anh as well. And Zainab, who's the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ, she passed away 8 years after Hijrah. She lived quite a long time, but generally no lineage comes from her, because all of her granddaughters passed away. They didn't get married and carry on having children. Ruqayya and Kulthum, they're well known to come together, because Ruqayya and Kulthum, they were both married to the sons of Abu Lahab. So Abu Lahab, who was obviously the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, so they were married to the sons of Abu Lahab. And when the Prophet ﷺ had Tabbat yada Abi Lahabin wa tab revealed to him, then Abu Lahab came into Makkah and said to his sons that either you divorce them or you don't live with me. So both of the daughters of the Prophet, one of the greatest sacrifices of the Prophet ﷺ, the kind of disgrace which was people tried to force onto him, and both of his daughters were divorced and announced openly because of this revelation. And then, however, both of them got married to Uthman radiallahu anh, and this is what we find. First it was Ruqayya, she passed away. Then Kulthum also got married to Uthman radiallahu anh, which is one of the achievements of Uthman radiallahu anh. So Ruqayya was born first, and she passed away at the Battle of Badr also. We mentioned this last week in Jummah Bayan. Uthman radiallahu anh, he didn't participate in Badr because he was looking after Ruqayya, the daughter of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then very soon after that, Ruqayya radiallahu anh passed away because she was ill. That's why he was looking after her. So all of this contextualizes the life of Uthman as well. That was Ruqayya. Kulthum also married to Uthman radiallahu anh. However, they had no children, and she passed away 9 years after Hijrah, about 7-8 years after Ruqayya. Fatima radiallahu anh is obviously the most famous, the most beloved, the one where the lineage of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam comes from. Nowadays we know people who are Sayyid because their lineage goes to Fatima radiallahu anh. So she had 5 children. She had Hassan, Hussein, Muhsin, Kulthum and Zainab. And she obviously lived until after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She passed away 6 months after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away. A very famous hadith, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was close to passing away, the Prophet ﷺ, obviously Fatima was very sad, but then the Prophet ﷺ whispered something to her, and then she became happy. So everybody was wondering what's that all about. And then it was because she said that obviously the news was he's going to pass away, but then the Prophet told her that you will come very quickly afterwards. So a few months after she passed away. And the last son is Abdullah radiallahu anh. He was born later, and also he passed away very, very young, before even his first birthday. So these are the 6 children of the Prophet ﷺ which have been born until now. Obviously there's one more that comes later, but we try and remember these. Everybody agrees on these children. And obviously all of them, they grew up as Muslims and they all converted to Islam as well. Moving on, obviously from now on we're going to be looking at the next, we're going to move on. The Prophet ﷺ, the next thing is going to be the prophethood of the Prophet ﷺ. So just a brief recap, we'll quickly go through everything we've done so far, just to briefly recap what we have done so far, inshallah. What's that one? Inshallah, so Yeah, everyone got one? Yeah, so if we look at this, this is a brief summary of more or less everything we've done. So the first lesson, if you remember, we'll start from, it goes from right to left across. So the first lesson was the reason we need to learn knowledge overall. Why do we need to learn knowledge? That was the first thing. Then why we study Seerah specifically, we had many reasons for studying Seerah. The love of the Prophet ﷺ, because we have to follow the Prophet ﷺ, so we have to understand his life, to be able to negate any misunderstandings we have about the Prophet ﷺ as well. Then after that we looked at the background, we looked at the world at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So when the Prophet ﷺ was born, before he was born, what was the condition of the world? The Syrian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Roman Empire, the Arabian Peninsula, what was the condition of the people? And this is what we studied before we even looked at specifics. And then we looked at the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ, his great-grandfather, his grandfather, his father, and also his uncles, and the clan he was born into, Quraysh overall. We looked at that. Then we looked at his grandfather's life a little bit in more detail, because we didn't look at his grandfather too much, but we knew Hashim, who was his grandfather. So we have Muhammad, his father, Abdullah, Abdul Muttalib, and Hashim after this. So we looked at Hashim, very well respected, very generous. That was a summary of his life. Then very respected as well. Abdul Muttalib, very, very well respected leader of the Quraysh, almost. Yeah, very famous across the world for being the leader of Arabia. And then Abdul Muttalib, he had the dream where he dug up Zamzam again, and Zamzam water was then there. It was lost, the well was lost. Abdul Muttalib found the well, he dug it up, and he gave everyone access to Zamzam again. This is a big achievement. Then obviously the father of the Prophet ﷺ gets married to Amina. Then we looked at, just before the Prophet ﷺ was born, the elephant incident happened, where the people from Yemen tried to destroy the Kaaba, and that was a big incident. And then after this, before the birth of the Prophet ﷺ, the father of the Prophet ﷺ passes away. So that's the second box. The third box is the birth itself, where we see the miracles which happened in Persia. Certain things collapsed, earthquakes happened. We saw that fear was struck into the emperor of Persia at that time. Miracles which happened at the home of the Prophet ﷺ, where the light was emanating, there was no pain in the labor. He was born circumcised, and the cord was cut off as well. Then the Prophet ﷺ, his Aqiqah happened. He was named by his grandfather, and just for a few days he was suckled by his mother. After birth, moving on to the next line, the early upbringing. Then the Prophet ﷺ, he went to the village. Why he went to the village, all of that we studied. Then we looked at originally Halima, the amount of blessing she had in her life after this. And then, this is a very long story obviously, but this is just the title, so we can, all of the, everything we learned about that should come back to our minds. Then the splitting of the chest happened, and after this the Prophet ﷺ came back to live in Mecca. And then he, obviously his mother passed away at 6, so then he went into the care of Abdul Muttalib. At the age of 8, Abdul Muttalib passed away. Then he went into the care of Abu Talib, and then everything we done last week. We done all this last week. The drought, the dua at the time of the drought. He went to Syria to meet Bahira the monk, who told him that he's going to be a prophet. Then he participated in the war. Then he participated in the Fudul alliance, in the alliance which was to protect the poor people. Then he learns to trade. He grazed goats. He got his reputation developed, and he started developing a relationship with Khadija radiallahu anha. He traded for her, and eventually he got married to Khadija radiallahu anha. Then the last box, age 26 to 40, he arbitrated, this is today's lesson, he arbitrated in the Blackstone dispute while he was 35. Then he began to, then the incident of Zayd bin Haritha happened, and then there's a couple more things which we haven't touched on, but we'll start touching on them next week. But as he draws closer to 40, we know he spends a lot of time in the cave Hira. So he starts meditating a lot, spending time alone, away from the people, and this is something the Prophet ﷺ really started doing.